This is going to be a review and an evaluation of Penn State's blue-white scrimmage game from Saturday. Of course, I guess some people would hesitate to call it a game. There was talk that it was just called the blue-white event. Who knows what it'll be called in the future? Obviously, it's a very unique situation with them having to change the format. I actually like the pace. I actually like a lot of what I thought I saw on film. I wish I could have been there in person. I understand that there was some complaints about certain things, and I will address those later. This is generally going to be focused on the offense and just the tone and the pace that I saw set. There was 8 periods. The Big Ten Network announcers kept calling them segments. More on that later. But I like the pace that was set. They moved from one period to another quickly. James Franklin and the coaches clearly had that planned out really well, especially given that from at least from what I read a week ago and leading up to the game, the lack of O-line depth was something that they knew about, clearly. But the decision to kind of switch the format might have been made maybe at the last second. And I agree with the decision. If it was made, with the best interest of the health for the offensive line and the program in general, I think it makes sense. Now, the Big Ten Network announcers, I know there were some complaints about some of them. I thought Millen was great. Um, Segments, periods, whatever. I mean, I understood what they were calling them, but in coaching terms, you call them periods. And I know there was some complaint also about no running clock in the stadium that informed the fans and the media of the time remaining in each period. And I understand that, and if they had to do it over again, that would probably make more sense. But from watching it on the Big Ten Network, the flow of the game or the event was appropriate. I didn't think that there weren't too many players who were just resting for 15 minutes before being, or even longer, before being thrown back into a live situation cold. I thought the offense under Sean Clifford looked pretty good, although the defense, if you ask me, kind of kept things quite basic. I know there was only one TD in team play. The announcers were calling it 11 on 11. It's team. Some of the things I noticed about the offense, to be honest with you, in terms of predictability from last season, are still there, and they were still there Saturday. But I thought there was a lot of really exciting things on offense, a lot of new talent. The wide receiver room, the competition level there is going to be incredibly high. The running back group, Penn State fans should be extremely excited about. But the predictability of the offense from certain formations, and if you're new to my channel, I get it, but the predictability is still there from certain formations. I'll deal with that in a later video. That's clearly going to be something that I get time to do, once the NFL draft is over. Obviously, Sean Clifford is clearly the best quarterback for this team. There's no doubt about that, at least right now. After watching the spring game, he was in control. He looked like he was just cruising through any concept, whatever he was asked to execute. Zone read plays, he read them correctly. Pass plays, he got the ball out quick when there was routes that developed and were available to him. To me, he'll be drastically improved. I'm talking about Sean Clifford when there is a competent run game alongside him. When he has there's some balance to the offense in terms of the run threat, and they will clearly have that if you ask me. They brought in 2 incredibly talented freshmen to go along with Kevon Lee. But obviously it's still up in the air whether they can run the ball consistently against Big Ten teams or even when they go to play at Auburn. But the present, Sean Clifford, and the future at quarterback looks very bright. And when I say future, I don't mean Drew Aller. Christian Veloux is impressive. And he was impressive last year against Rutgers, obviously. But I thought he was impressive Saturday, and I don't really mean the stats, to be honest with you. Veloux, has already had significant playing time from last year. I mean, that 3-touchdown, 230-yard effort against Rutgers last November was awesome. I mean, he stepped right in. I don't even know that he was necessarily slated to be the starter for that game as of that Friday practice. I think it was Mason Stahl was the guy who took all the first-team reps. I thought Aller looked a little slow in some of the situations in terms of processing the route combinations as they developed. Now, granted, the groups that Aller was working with, they weren't necessarily getting guys open, to be honest with you. But generally, I thought Christian Veloux worked through his progressions quicker and at least found or targeted the right receiver in most of that situations. And look, it's to be expected that Drew Aller, would struggle a little bit in terms of going up against that level of player, facing Penn State's defense. He should be, Drew Aller should be graduating from high school in a couple of weeks or something like that. He did struggle in the team and 11 on 11 and 7 on 7 time periods. had to scramble multiple times early, looking for something to develop. Like, that makes sense. I think he's 18 years old, right? But Christian Valou was, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing his last name. He was smooth. He was in control, just like Clifford was. And it should be obvious to anyone who watched the scrimmage or attended, the offense is clearly committed to trying to run the ball. I thought that it was telling that the first play of the scrimmage in that 2 point period, that I enjoyed them moving from one situation to another. That's the game of football. We call it sudden change, the guys that I've been blessed enough to coach with. But sudden change means you're expecting this to happen, and now there's a new situation to deal with as coaches in practice and in spring situations like this. What you try to do is design those sudden change moments so that your players can react to them well or appropriately when it happens during the season. That first play was, by design, a run play down there in the 2 point conversion area. I get it. They had the awful moments last year, the 9 overtime game or whatever, or 9 2 point attempts that failed in a row. In a loss. But it was interesting that first play was a run play to Nick Singleton. It was a downhill run play with the freshman back there and Clifford under center. And just to give you a little hint, Penn State's offense, when they're under center versus in the gun, the run pass ratio is drastically different. And the threats are drastically different. But in any case, I thought Singleton looked good on that play. Obviously, he did struggle to find open space consistently, but he got limited opportunities. Kevon Lee looked impressive. I thought the offense really could have attacked the starting defense to the boundary like all day long. But again, Penn State's defense I thought was keeping things quite basic, even though to the boundary they looked susceptible. But James Franklin made it a point after the game or after the event to talk about the commitment to the run game, and he has to. He has to. Last year, if you're not sure, they only averaged like 3.2 or 3.3 yards per carry, and they were like 118th and 120th in yards per game, rushing yards per game, and rushing yards per carry. Incredibly low in the FBS rankings and incredibly low for a Penn State team. They've addressed it as far as the running backs with Lee, Singleton, and Katron Allen. Obviously, he's talented as well. The O-line situation, I think, will be a focus, especially after the format. I'm sure that there's fans that are complaining or about the offensive line because the format had to be changed essentially to address the lack of depth at that position. But look, there's at least 4 commits that I'm aware of that should bolster that offensive line. And then there's the Cornell transfer, Hunter Norzad. Those guys should all improve the offensive line despite the loss of Rasheed Walker. But look, the biggest new asset might be one that they didn't really spend a lot of time talking about. The announcers did, I guess, at some point. Mitchell Tinsley looks dangerous. He looked dangerous every time he touched the football, or at least every time he was targeted. Penn State got a gem. They just got a gem in the transfer portal. The pickup of Norzad will be huge, don't get me wrong. But to me, Tinsley looks like he can replace like 70 to 80% of what Jahan Dotson did last year, and that's saying a lot because Dotson went over 90 catches and had an unbelievable season. He's going to be a first-round pick. Tinsley showed big playability, scoring the only touchdown in team. But look, he played against some good talent last year. They played Army, they played Indiana, they played Michigan State. And in case you're not sure, when they played Michigan State, of course, Western Kentucky lost to Michigan State 48-31. And they scored 2 touchdowns late to make it look even closer than it was. But Tinsley had 7 catches for 127 against Michigan State. And that's including a 60-yard catch in the first half on like the 3rd possession. He had 14 TD catches last year, 87 catches as a junior. And he showed that potential, I thought, on Saturday. I'm generally only going to focus on the offense and certain players in this eval. I intend to watch the game a second time. But I think Tinsley looks like a real weapon. He scored the day's only touchdown in team on that bubble screen from Clifford. I prefer the bubble screen with motion like that play as opposed to just lining up in a bunch set and throwing the screen out there. I thought Penn State did that far too often last year, lining up in a static or stationary bunch set to the boundary and throwing a little screen out there. I would rather get a guy like Mitchell Tinsley on the move and throw the ball to him, essentially recreating that bunch or trip set with motion. There was nice blocking on that play by Tyler Warren, who is just an awesome football player, and Keandre Lambert-Smith. And look, Warren also played a integral role in another TD pass, but this one was called back for an obvious hold on Kevon Lee. It was the 9th play of the day, and when I say 9th play of the day, I mean I'm including the initial 2-point conversion period. Clifford hit Malik Mega on a mesh concept, and if you're unfamiliar, mesh is 2 underneath or shallow drags, and Mega benefited from a really Mega was the X, okay, to the right hand side of the offense. He benefited from a nice pick or screen from Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren lined up on the left hand side of the offense. Warren ran like a shallow underneath drag, and Mega ran the other shallow underneath drag from the opposite side. They cross each other, and Warren's job is to pick or screen Mega's defender. It was quite obvious to me that the ball was intended to go to Mega, and the way you can tell is the running back, which in this case was Kevon Lee, lined up on the left. Typically, the ball is designed to go to, or the receiver is designed to be targeted, who originates from the side opposite the running back in a mesh concept. And look, when Mega catches the football, he's wide open, and he could have maybe scored anyway, but Kevon Lee, committed a really bad hold out in space, and the score was called back. I thought Lee looked great running the football, though, running downhill, real decisive with his cuts, obviously strong. He consistently made his cuts on the zone concept off the backside tackle. So the backside tackle is working the same direction that Kevon Lee is, and then he's able to cut downhill off of that backside tackle's block, which essentially in some ways ends up looking like a down block, even though it's not the same concept. He was able to gain yards after contact. Obviously, Nick Singleton and Katron Allen both flashed the ability, that's created all the buzz around the Penn State program. They both look good too, but I thought it looked like Kevon Lee was real decisive and looks like the number one guy there, at least for now. Wide receiver room, incredibly deep. Tinsley, Lambert Smith, who I mentioned earlier, Jaden Dotton, Malik Mega, Omari Evans, they all had moments where they either made plays or they got open and the ball was overthrown. Clifford, Valu, and Aller each had throws where they overthrew people. They were excited, obviously. I thought the timing of the pass game was a little inconsistent, especially when Aller was in the game. But I know there's other factors. I'm not just, pointing the finger at Drew Aller there. In terms of the wide receivers who were in the game with him and who they were matched up against defensively. It was kind of surprising to me and interesting. Mason Stahl looked good at wide receiver. He made some nice catches. He looked capable. He was obviously a former quarterback, and I alluded to it earlier. If you don't recall, he was slated to start that Rutgers game in 2021 when the flu just ravaged through the team. He was the guy who took the reps with the first team on Friday, and then Christian Valu ended up getting the start and playing great. But Mason Stahl looks like he's made the transition to wide receiver quickly. Offensive line is going to be difficult to judge, to be honest with you, without a second watch of the game. I intend to do that, if I get an opportunity to before the draft. Once the draft happens, I probably will not be taking another look at this spring game. I will, however, go back and watch some things defensively. I've tried to be as lenient as possible because I think it's pretty obvious. Manny Diaz was trying to keep things vanilla. It's been well documented that the defense is generally ahead of the offense during spring. And so I think keeping that in mind, Manny Diaz and the whole program and staff probably made a decision to keep things quite vanilla coverage-wise. But they did throw some different looks in there, especially during the 7-on-7 time. But I won't be too harsh with my evaluation of the defense. I did notice a couple of things. Block destruction at the second level, their linebacker level. I think that needs some work. And I mean the inside linebackers and the star. I'm calling it a star. Essentially, it's the nickel in Manny Diaz's 4-2-5. Now, the initial guy that started at the star position, Jonathan Sutherland, a redshirt senior, him and the inside linebackers, they struggled to get off blocks. And I think in some cases, especially an inside linebacker, they're just too small when they're faced with an offensive guard. When a guard gets to work up to them, it's very difficult. For example, number 23, it's his size. It's very difficult for him to take on an offensive guard and then be able to destroy that block and make a play on the running back. That's a lot to ask for someone that size. Having said that, I thought Kobe King played really well. He was assertive from C-gap to C-gap. I would have liked to have seen better block destruction on one particular play from him. I think it was the 7th play. It was an early 3rd and 1. It was a run play by Kevon Lee. Downhill concept. It might have been duo as a concept. King filled immediately, and he got to the correct leverage side on the guard that was working up to him. But he just was unable to shed and make a play on the football, and Lee ran right through the gap untouched. Now, it wasn't Kobe King's gap necessarily, to be honest with you, but he's there to make a play, does a nice job taking on the guard. Too often, I thought that number 23, whose name escapes me right now, and Kobe King, I thought they both kind of picked a side, and I thought Sutherland was somewhat guilty of that as well. Dominic DeLuca, another one, took on a couple of blocks and just essentially picked a side instead of really setting it back inside with some force. Having said that, Dominic DeLuca showed off. That performance was impressive. Everywhere they put him, he made plays. He had the interception in 7-on-7. He had a sack. Well, he touched the quarterback, so they counted it as a sack in that format at least. He played so well, in fact, I don't know if you noticed it, making like at least 3 splash plays, that near the end of the scrimmage, he was the star or the nickel that was on in the 4-2-5. That he had replaced Sutherland. Now, that might have been the plan all along, and in most cases, you're not going to make those changes in the middle of the spring because you're going to have informed the kids or the players, hey, you're going to play on this possession, and this possession. So you probably wouldn't want to alienate someone by replacing them in a spring scrimmage. But look, I thought DeLuca played well, and I thought Sutherland looked apprehensive on some run plays at him, and didn't really force the ball inside with any commitment, especially I think it was the 3rd offensive snap of the game. So it'll be interesting to see how that star, or I'm calling it the star, it's essentially a nickel. I don't know what Manny Diaz calls it. I'll have to look that up. It'll be interesting to see how that position plays out as the Purdue game inches closer. As the scrimmage developed, for me, mentally, it became obvious that there was a lot of built-in pressure schemes that Diaz has that he didn't let the defense show. And I thought that was probably a smart decision. They stayed quite basic. In fact, the first 4 or 5 plays, I think the defense was in a nearly identical alignment in terms of defensive front, coverage, and everything. I think it's unfair of me to try to judge the defense at this point. And I know they only had, I think, 15 practices. So in terms of the block destruction stuff by the linebackers at the second level, I understand that they will get better at that once they have more consistent practice time. Zaki Wheatley is the last guy that I'll focus on. Obviously played great all over the field as a safety. A lot of athletic ability, can cover. And I think even on that last play, the touchdown, where the receiver's foot came down out of bounds, I think if you watch it, the timing of Zaki Wheatley's challenge, he understood, I've got to push this guy out of bounds. I thought it was very savvy and aware player for being a redshirt freshman. I intend to take a second look at the defensive stuff and give a more complete and maybe more accurate evaluation of some of the things that I saw, especially in terms of the coverages. But this looks like a really talented team that's going to be fun to watch. Having a top recruiting class in the nation doesn't hurt at all. I think James Franklin's done a great job putting that program in a position to explode on the national scene this year. You guys let me know what you think in the comments section, what you thought of Penn State's blue-white event, and what you think of some of my evaluations here. I think this roster is showing that it's going to be quite deep and have a lot of guys who can contribute early.